Some folks say home is where you hang your hat, but I reckon home is where someone waits for you to come back. That was the thought that kept Jack Weston awake night after night, the empty spaces of his home echoing with silence. It wasn't just the house that felt cold, though. It was the emptiness that lingered in his chest, the absence of the woman who had promised to stand by him forever. And in his heart, he knew that she had betrayed him. Claire, his wife, had traded the love they had built for the empty promises of a drifter who never cared. Jack had spent years working the land, building their home from the ground up, only for it all to be torn apart in a single moment. The gold they had saved, the dreams they had shared, all vanished with a letter that came in the mail, the contents of which shattered everything. Claire had gone. She left without a word, without a trace, only to return months later, her eyes filled with secrets. Jack didn't know if he was supposed to be angry, hurt, or numb. He just knew he couldn't stand the woman who had once been his partner. The woman who had once promised him she would be there for better or worse, who now stood in front of him, asking for forgiveness. He hadn't asked for her to return. He hadn't wanted to see her again. Yet, here she was, standing in the doorway, like nothing had ever happened. Jack's heart pounded as he watched her, every step she took forward only reminding him of the betrayal that had broken him. He didn't know how to look at her anymore, how to feel. She had traded their wedding vows, their life, for a man who didn't deserve her. A man who wasn't even there to pick up the pieces when she shattered their world. Jack had never been one for second chances. He had seen enough of the world to know that promises were often broken and love was often a lie. But Claire's return, it stirred something inside him. Maybe it was just the emptiness that had become his companion for so long. Maybe it was the loneliness that had eaten at him since she left. But as Claire stepped into the room, he couldn't deny that part of him. Still wanted to believe in the woman she once was, the woman who had once been his everything. "I'm sorry, Jack," Claire whispered, her voice fragile, barely above a breath. "I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I need you to know that I'm not the same woman who walked away." Jack didn't say a word. He didn't need to. He had already made up his mind. The trust was gone. The love had died. And yet, there she was, standing before him, asking for a chance. He wanted to say no. He wanted to turn his back and walk away. But instead, his gaze softened, and the silence between them stretched long, filled with years of hurt, regret, and an unspoken hope that maybe, just maybe, things could be different. "Why should I believe you?" he finally asked, his voice low, the weight of his words hanging in the air. Claire didn't have an answer. She just stood there, waiting for him to decide if he could find it in his heart to forgive her. Jack knew the answer wouldn't come easy, but something about her presence, the way she stood there, vulnerable yet determined, made him wonder if he had the strength to give her one last chance. It wasn't just for her. It was for himself, too. To know if he could still love again. To know if he could still trust. To know if he could find his way back home. Jack stood still, his heart pounding as Claire's words lingered in the air. Her apology, though sincere, couldn't erase the pain of the past. It had been too long, too much had changed. Yet, despite everything, part of him wanted to hear her out. The silence stretched between them, each second adding weight to the decision he had to make. Claire shifted slightly, her hands clasped tightly in front of her, the same hands that had once held his so tenderly. Her eyes were filled with uncertainty, but there was a quiet determination in them, a reflection of the woman she had become. "I'm here to make it right, Jack," she continued softly. "I know I can't undo the past, but I want to rebuild what we had." Jack took a deep breath, the bitterness that had festered in him for months threatening to rise to the surface. His gaze fell to the floor, unable to meet hers. Could he really trust her again? Could he look past the betrayal that had shattered everything he had known? The days without her had been long and cold, and the nights even worse. He had learned to live with the silence, but he had never stopped longing for the warmth of her presence. It was a truth he could not deny. "You say you want to rebuild." Jack finally spoke, his voice steady but tinged with skepticism. "But how can I believe you, Claire? You left me when I needed you the most. You gave up on us without a second thought." Claire took a step forward, her expression softening. "I didn't give up, Jack. I made a terrible mistake. I was lost, confused, and I didn't know where to turn. But I know now, more than ever, that the life we built together is worth fighting for." Jack looked up at her then, his eyes narrowing as he tried to read the sincerity in her face. It had been so long since he had seen her this vulnerable, this open. Part of him wanted to hold on to the anger, to push her away, but another part of him was tempted to believe her. He had always loved her, even when he tried not to. "What do you want from me, Claire?" His voice was softer now, a crack in the armor he had built around his heart. "I don't know if I can give you what you're asking for." Claire's eyes searched his face, as if trying to find some sign that he still cared. "I'm not asking for your forgiveness right away, Jack," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm asking for a chance to prove that I can make it right, that I can be the woman you deserve." There it was, the plea he had been dreading. She was asking for something he wasn't sure he could give. Trust. Love. His heart was torn in two, each side pulling him in a different direction. He had spent so many nights thinking about this moment, wondering if he could ever let go of the hurt. Now that she was standing here, asking for his heart again, he didn't know if he could. He had to decide, but the choice wasn't easy. Jack took another step back, his mind racing as he thought about the life they once shared. He thought about the way she used to laugh, the way she cared for him when he was sick, the way she had held him close when the world felt too heavy. But that was before she left him, before she broke the trust they had built. Could he really go back to that place? Could he forgive her? "I don't know if I can, Claire," Jack said, his voice breaking for the first time. "I don't know if I can forget what you did, but I will try. For us. For what we were." Claire's face softened, and she stepped closer, reaching out to him. "Thank you, Jack," she whispered, her voice full of gratitude. "That's all I need. A chance to show you that I can be that woman again." Jack didn't know if he was making the right choice, but he knew he couldn't let her go. Not without trying. Not without seeing if love could heal what had been broken. And as they stood there in the quiet of their home, Jack knew that the road ahead would be difficult. But maybe, just maybe, they could find their way back to each other. The days that followed were heavy with silence, each one stretching longer than the last. Jack tried to fill the emptiness by working harder, focusing on the tasks that kept his mind occupied. He spent hours in the barn, repairing fences and tending to the cattle. It was easier that way, to keep moving, to keep his hands busy, than to face the reality of Claire's return. But no matter how hard he worked, the quiet of the house was always there, a constant reminder that things had changed. Claire, on the other hand, seemed to settle into the rhythm of the house with a quiet grace. She didn't push him, didn't ask for anything more than his presence. She spent her days cleaning, cooking, and fixing things around the house, all the while never asking for forgiveness, just quietly proving that she was there, ready to stay. Jack had noticed the small changes in her. The way she no longer flinched when he walked into the room, the way she spoke with more kindness than before, the way she cared for the animals as if they were her own. It was as though she was slowly rebuilding herself, piece by piece, and Jack couldn't help but watch, torn between his old love for her and the hurt that still lingered. One evening, after a long day in the fields, Jack returned to the house to find Claire sitting by the fire, a book in her hands. She looked up as he entered, offering him a soft smile, the kind of smile that used to make his heart skip a beat. "Dinner's almost ready," she said, her voice calm and steady. Jack nodded, but didn't say anything. He was still unsure about what to feel. Part of him wanted to hold on to the anger, to remind her of the past, but another part of him was willing to let it go, to see if they could rebuild what they had lost. As he sat down at the table, Claire placed a bowl of stew in front of him, her hands trembling slightly. Jack noticed it, but he said nothing. Instead, he picked up his spoon and began to eat. The silence between them wasn't as heavy as it had been before. There was a quiet understanding now, a kind of truce, though neither of them had spoken the words aloud. As the evening wore on, Jack felt the tension in his chest begin to ease, though he didn't know if it was because of the food or because of the woman sitting across from him. For the first time in months, he felt a flicker of something close to hope. It wasn't much, but it was enough to make him wonder if, maybe, just maybe, they could find their way back to each other. The next morning, as Jack walked out to tend to the horses, he found Claire standing by the barn, her hands on her hips as she surveyed the work that still needed to be done. She turned to him when she heard him approach, her expression soft but determined. "I can help with the horses today," she said. Jack looked at her, surprised by the offer. "You don't have to," he replied, though part of him appreciated the gesture. "I know I don't have to," Claire said, her voice steady. "But I want to." Jack met her gaze, and for a moment, he saw the woman he had once loved so deeply. She wasn't the same as before, but in that moment, it didn't matter. Maybe, just maybe, they could rebuild what they had, together. He didn't say anything, but he nodded, allowing her to join him as they worked side by side. The hours passed quickly, the rhythm of their work easing the tension that had once seemed insurmountable. They didn't speak much, but there was a quiet understanding between them, a sense of peace that Jack hadn't realized he had been missing. As the sun began to set, casting a warm glow over the land, Jack felt something inside him stir, a feeling he hadn't had in a long time. It was the beginning of something, though he wasn't sure what. But for the first time in what felt like forever, Jack allowed himself to believe in the possibility of a future with Claire. A future that was still uncertain, but one that was worth fighting for. The days blended together, each one more peaceful than the last. Jack found himself adjusting to the quiet company of Claire, her presence no longer a source of tension but of calm. It wasn't the same as it had been before, but there was something growing between them, something that felt right. They worked side by side every day, each task another step toward rebuilding the life they had lost. Claire had proven herself with her actions, not her words. She showed up, she worked hard, and most of all, she had become the woman Jack had always hoped she could be. He saw it in the way she smiled at him now, a genuine smile that reached her eyes, the way she no longer seemed distant or afraid. She had let go of the shame that had once held her back, and Jack couldn't help but admire her for it. One evening, as the sun began to set, casting a golden hue across the land, Claire stood by the porch, watching the horizon. Jack walked up behind her, his boots crunching on the gravel, and paused a few steps away. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, his voice low and steady. Claire turned to him, her face illuminated by the fading light. "I'm thinking about how much things have changed," she replied, her voice soft, yet filled with a quiet strength. "How much I've changed?" Jack nodded, his heart swelling with a mixture of pride and uncertainty. He had always known Claire had the potential to be strong, to be the woman she was now. But could he ever forget what had happened? Could he ever truly forgive her for the betrayal? The question lingered in his mind, unanswered, but for the first time in weeks, he didn't feel the weight of it as much. "I've been thinking about that, too," Jack said, stepping closer to her. "About how much we've both changed. About how we're both different now." Claire's gaze softened, and for a moment, the silence between them was comfortable, not awkward. She reached out and took his hand, her touch warm and steady. "Jack," she whispered, "I can't change the past. I can't make it right, no matter how hard I try. But I want you to know that I'm here, with you, now. And I'll stay. I'll do whatever it takes to prove that I'm worthy of your trust again." Jack looked down at their intertwined hands, the steady beat of his heart matching the rhythm of the world around them. He didn't have all the answers. He didn't know what the future would hold for them, but in that moment, he realized that it didn't matter. They were here, together, and that was enough. Claire had proven herself, not through grand gestures or promises, but through the quiet, everyday moments where she had shown up, when she had chosen him and their life together. And Jack realized that, maybe, just maybe, that was enough for him to believe in the possibility of a future with her. As they stood there, hand in hand, the sun dipped below the horizon, and Jack felt a spark of something deep within him, a spark of hope. It was a quiet hope, a subtle one, but it was there. And for the first time in a long time, Jack was willing to let that hope grow. "We'll take it one day at a time," he said, his voice steady, as if he had made up his mind. Claire smiled, and for the first time, it wasn't just a smile of apology or regret. It was a smile of possibility, of a future that might be waiting for them. "One day at a time," she agreed. And for the first time in a long while, Jack felt the weight of the past lift, just a little, as they both stepped into the future together. The mornings had started to feel different, more alive, as though the weight of the past was slowly lifting. Jack and Claire continued their work on the farm, side by side, with a newfound sense of rhythm. The days felt easier now, less strained, and Jack couldn't help but notice how much more natural it was to have Claire by his side. She had become a part of the land again, as if she had always belonged there. He had watched her, From the way she tended to the animals to how she meticulously repaired the fences, never complaining, always moving with a quiet determination. Jack didn't say much, but he felt the shift, the quiet healing that was happening in small moments between them. As the weeks went by, the house that had once felt cold now felt warm, filled with the kind of quiet contentment Jack hadn't known in years. It wasn't the same as before, but it was something new, something worth holding on to. One evening, as Jack sat on the porch, watching the sun dip below the horizon, Claire joined him, sitting down beside him without saying a word. For a while, neither of them spoke. The air was cool, and the crickets were beginning to sing their evening song. Jack looked at Claire, who was staring out at the land, her eyes lost in thought. He knew she wasn't the same woman who had left him months ago. She had changed, and as much as he hated to admit it, so had he. They had both been through so much, and yet, here they were, together. Claire turned to him, her expression softer now. "Jack," she said quietly, "I know we're still finding our way, but I want you to know that I'm here for you. I'm not going anywhere." Jack met her gaze, feeling the weight of her words. He hadn't expected it, but somewhere along the way, he had started to believe in her again. There was still so much unspoken between them, so much to work through, but for the first time in a long while, Jack felt a glimmer of hope. "I know," he said softly. "I know." The words hung in the air between them, not filled with promises, but with a quiet understanding. They didn't need to say much more. The silence between them was different now, no longer filled with the tension that had once consumed them. It was the kind of silence that came with trust, with a mutual understanding that neither of them had to prove anything anymore. They had both made mistakes, but they were still here, still trying. Jack reached over and took Claire's hand, his fingers brushing against hers. She didn't pull away. Instead, she tightened her grip, her hand warm in his. For a moment, Jack thought back to the days when their love had been simple, when the future seemed bright and full of possibilities. It had been a long time since he had thought of it that way, but now, with Claire beside him, he could almost see it again. A future where they could rebuild, where they could find joy in the little things. The days ahead were still uncertain, but Jack knew that, for the first time in a long while, they had a chance. And that was more than he had ever dared to hope for. As the stars began to twinkle in the night sky, Jack and Claire sat together, each of them lost in their own thoughts, but somehow, together. The past was still there, lingering in the corners of their minds, but they had both learned that it didn't have to define them. They could choose to move forward, one step at a time, and maybe, just maybe, they would find their way back to each other completely. The mornings had a crispness to them now, the kind that hinted at the change of seasons. Jack woke up earlier than usual, his body stiff from the long hours of work, but there was a sense of peace in the quiet. The sun had just started to rise, casting long shadows across the land, and Claire was already up, tending to the animals, her movements fluid and sure. Jack couldn't help but notice how natural it seemed, how she had found her place here again, in a way that felt permanent. He stepped outside, his boots crunching against the frost-covered ground, and walked over to where Claire was. She looked up as he approached, her eyes soft and welcoming, a faint smile curling at the corners of her mouth. "Morning," she said, her voice still carrying the warmth it always had. Jack nodded, taking in the sight of her presence no longer a reminder of the pain of the past, but a part of the present, something he could rely on. "Morning," he replied, his voice steady, but there was something different about it now, a calmness that hadn't been there before. They worked together, side by side, in comfortable silence. Jack had learned to appreciate the quiet moments, the simple acts of being together without needing to fill the space with words. As the days went on, Claire continued to prove herself, not with grand gestures, but with the steady, quiet care she gave to everything around her. Jack watched her, her strength no longer a distant memory but a living, breathing thing. It was strange how easy it had become to be with her again, how the old wounds were slowly healing, not because of some dramatic event, but because they were both trying, day by day. One evening, as the fire crackled in the hearth, Jack sat by the window, watching the shadows dance across the floor. Claire was in the kitchen, humming softly as she prepared dinner. The smell of bread and stew filled the house, and for the first time in what felt like years, Jack felt something stir within him. He wasn't sure what it was, but it was there. It was hope. He turned from the window and walked into the kitchen, where Claire was working. She didn't notice him at first, her focus entirely on the task at hand. But when she did, she smiled, and it was like a piece of the puzzle that had been missing for so long clicked into place. "It smells good," Jack said, his voice softer than usual. Claire looked up at him, her smile widening. "I thought you'd like it," she said, her tone light, but Jack could hear the sincerity in it. "You've been working hard." Jack nodded, feeling the weight of the day in his shoulders, but there was no bitterness in it now, no frustration. Just the quiet satisfaction of knowing that things were changing, slowly but surely. He stepped closer, his hand brushing against hers as she moved the pot on the stove. For a moment, their fingers lingered, and Jack felt the old connection stir again, like the gentle spark of something he had almost forgotten. "Claire," he said, his voice low, almost hesitant. "I don't know what the future holds, but I know that I'm glad you're here." She looked at him, her expression softening, and for the first time, Jack realized how much he had missed this. Her presence, her warmth, the way she made the house feel like a home. "I'm glad too," Claire whispered, her hand still resting lightly in his. They didn't need to say more. The words were there, unspoken, but understood. They had come a long way, both of them, and though there was still so much to work through, there was also something that had been rebuilt between them. Something real. Something that couldn't be taken away. As they sat down to eat together, the quiet between them wasn't filled with tension anymore. It was filled with something else, something they both had been searching for. And Jack knew, in that moment, that no matter what came next, they would face it together. The days had begun to feel like they were slipping away, each one blending into the next, and yet, for the first time in a long while, Jack didn't mind. The work had become easier, the land more forgiving, and the silence between him and Claire, once so heavy, now felt like a quiet understanding. They didn't need to fill every moment with words. They had learned to communicate in the small things, the way Claire would make sure the fire was stoked before bed, or the way Jack would fix the broken fence without her asking. It was in these quiet exchanges that their connection deepened. They had moved past the pain of the past and found a new rhythm, one that felt right, one that felt like home. One afternoon, as they worked side by side in the fields, Jack found himself watching Claire more closely. She was moving with a grace that he hadn't seen in her for years. She had always been strong, but now there was something more, something that made him proud. "You've come a long way," Jack said, wiping the sweat from his brow as he looked at her. Claire paused for a moment, glancing up at him with a smile that was full of quiet satisfaction. "So have you," she replied. Jack's heart warmed at her words. He hadn't realized just how much time had passed since the day she returned. It felt like a lifetime ago, and yet, in so many ways, it felt like they were just beginning. Later that evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Jack and Claire sat together on the porch, watching the colors fade from the sky. Jack's hand found hers, and for a moment, he didn't speak. He didn't need to. Claire squeezed his hand gently, her thumb tracing the lines of his palm in a way that felt comforting, grounding. "Do you ever wonder if we'll ever really be able to let go of the past?" Claire asked, her voice soft. Jack thought for a moment before answering, his gaze still fixed on the fading light. "I think the past will always be there," he said finally. "But I also think that we get to decide how it shapes us. We don't have to carry it with us forever." Claire nodded, her eyes thoughtful. "I want to believe that," she whispered, more to herself than to him. Jack turned to her, his eyes meeting hers. "You don't have to believe it all at once. Just take it one day at a time." Claire's lips curled into a smile, and Jack felt a weight lift from his chest. For the first time in what felt like forever, he truly believed in the possibility of a future, one that was built not on the mistakes of the past, but on the work they had done to heal, to grow, and to build something new together. As they sat there in the quiet of the evening, the sounds of the land surrounding them, Jack knew that whatever came next, they would face it together. They had learned that love wasn't just about the grand gestures, the promises made in moments of passion. It was about the small things, the everyday choices to show up, to be present, to stay. And in that moment, Jack knew that he had everything he needed right there beside him. The past might always be there, but the future was theirs to shape. And for the first time in a long time, Jack felt ready to step into it, with Claire by his side. The harvest season was fast approaching, and with it, A sense of urgency filled the air. Jack and Claire had worked hard all year, their efforts beginning to show in the fields. The crops were healthy, the barn stood strong, and the house, though humble, had a warmth to it that Jack hadn't known in years. But even with all the progress, Jack knew that there was still work to be done. The weight of the past hadn't fully left him, and though the peace between him and Claire was real, there were still moments where the silence between them felt heavy. One evening, after a long day in the fields, Jack sat on the porch, staring out at the land. The golden light of the setting sun cast long shadows, and for the first time in a long while, he allowed himself to feel the weight of it all. "You're quiet tonight," Claire said as she stepped out onto the porch, her presence a welcome comfort. Jack didn't look at her right away, but the sound of her voice brought him back from the thoughts that had been swirling in his mind. "Just thinking," he said softly. Claire sat beside him, her hand brushing against his. "About what?" she asked, her voice gentle. Jack took a deep breath, feeling the tension in his chest loosen. "About how far we've come," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "But also about how much more we still have to figure out. I don't know if I'll ever completely let go of what happened." Claire was silent for a moment, her hand still resting in his. "You don't have to," she said finally, her voice steady. "I don't expect you to. But I'm here. I'm not going anywhere. We'll take it one step at a time, together." Jack turned to look at her then, his heart heavy with gratitude. She had been patient with him, more patient than he had ever expected, and yet, there was still so much he needed to work through. But hearing her say those words, knowing she was willing to walk this path with him, gave him a sense of peace he hadn't felt in a long time. "I don't deserve you," Jack whispered, his voice barely audible. Claire squeezed his hand, a soft smile on her lips. "You do," she said, her voice firm but filled with warmth. "You always have." They sat in silence, watching the sun sink lower in the sky, the sound of crickets filling the air. It was a peaceful moment, one that Jack hadn't known he was waiting for. In that quiet space between them, he felt the weight of the past begin to lift just a little. He didn't have all the answers, and he wasn't sure if he ever would. But with Claire by his side, he felt like maybe, just maybe, they could figure it out together. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but it was theirs to walk, and that was more than he had ever expected. As the last of the daylight faded and the stars began to twinkle in the night sky, Jack felt a sense of calm settle over him. He had found something he hadn't known he was looking for, a future, built not on perfect moments, but on the quiet understanding that, no matter what, they would face it together. The seasons continued to shift, and with each passing day, Jack and Claire settled deeper into the rhythm of their life together. The harvest was coming to an end, the fields now dotted with bundles of golden grain, and the barn was full with the fruits of their labor. Jack felt a sense of pride he hadn't known in years, not just in the land, but in the life they were building. The mornings had become routine, though no less meaningful. Claire would rise early, just as Jack did, and they would meet at the breakfast table, a quiet acknowledgement of the bond they shared now. But even in these small moments, Jack noticed how much had changed. The tension that had once existed between them, the unspoken walls that had separated their hearts, had slowly started to fade. There were still days when Jack felt the weight of the past settle on his shoulders, but those moments had become fewer, replaced by a growing sense of peace. The days seemed to pass more quickly now, and before Jack knew it, the first frost of the season had arrived, painting the world in a dusting of white. As the weather turned colder, Jack found himself inside more often, sitting by the fire with Claire, sharing the quiet of the evening. It was in these moments that Jack realized how much he had come to appreciate her presence. He had once thought that he would never be able to forgive her, never be able to look at her without the scars of the past clouding his vision. But time had a way of healing wounds, and now, with each passing day, those scars seemed to fade. Their presence no longer a heavy burden, but a part of their shared history. One evening, as the fire crackled and the wind howled outside, Claire leaned against Jack as they sat together by the hearth. Her head rested against his shoulder, and Jack could feel the warmth of her body, the comfort of her presence. "Jack," Claire whispered softly, her voice barely audible above the sound of the wind. "I know I've said this before, but I just need you to know how much I'm sorry for everything. For leaving, for breaking your heart. I can never undo the past, but I want you to know that I'm here, fully, now. And I want to make it right. Jack closed his eyes for a moment, the weight of her words sinking in. He had heard her say this before, and yet, this time it felt different. There was no desperation in her voice, no plea for forgiveness. It was simply an acknowledgement of the past, and a quiet promise to be there moving forward. I know, Jack said softly, his voice thick with emotion. And I know you've shown me that every day. I'm not asking you to fix everything. I just want you to be here, with me, as we are. Claire lifted her head from his shoulder, meeting his gaze. Her eyes were soft, but there was a spark in them now, something Jack hadn't seen in a long time. It was hope. Hope that their future could be different, that they could still find a way to heal and move forward. We'll take it one day at a time, she said, her voice firm, but full of warmth. Jack smiled, feeling a surge of affection for her. They had come so far, and though the road ahead was still uncertain, he knew that as long as they had each other, they would face whatever came their way. As the fire flickered and the night grew colder, Jack felt a sense of peace settle over him. The past would always be a part of them, but it no longer had the power to define them. They had learned to rebuild, to forgive, and to love again, and in that moment, Jack knew that, no matter what, they would continue to build their future together. The winter months crept in slowly, the mornings becoming colder and the nights longer. Jack and Claire had settled into a new routine, their days filled with the quiet work of the farm, their evenings spent together by the fire. There were no more awkward silences, no more unresolved tension between them. It was as if the past had finally taken its rightful place, behind them, and they had both learned to live with the scars it left. Jack found himself growing more comfortable with the idea of moving forward, his trust in Claire slowly building with each passing day. They had both changed, and the love they shared now wasn't the same as it had been before, but it was real, grounded in the understanding that they had both made mistakes, yet were still willing to fight for each other. One evening, as the snow fell gently outside, Jack stood by the window, watching the flakes dance in the wind. Claire was in the kitchen, humming softly as she worked, her presence filling the house in a way that made everything feel complete. Jack hadn't realized how much he had missed the simple act of sharing a space with someone, of not being alone in the world. Claire stepped into the room, her hands still warm from the oven. She smiled at Jack, and for a moment, it felt like the weight of everything had been lifted. "Dinner's ready," she said, her voice soft but strong. Jack turned to face her, his heart swelling with affection. It was hard to believe how much they had both grown. "I'll be right there," he said, his voice thick with emotion. As they sat down to eat together, the flickering light of the fire cast a warm glow over the room. The meal was simple, but it didn't matter. What mattered was that they were together, sharing this moment, with no lingering shadows of the past between them. As they finished their meal, Claire set her fork down and looked at Jack, her gaze steady. "I know we've both been through a lot," she began, her voice quiet but sincere. "And I know we can't undo everything, but I want you to know that I'm here. For you. For us." Jack met her gaze, his chest tight with emotion. "I know," he said softly. "I feel it too." The words were simple, but they carried the weight of everything they had been through. They didn't need to say more. There was an understanding between them now, a bond that had been forged through their struggles, and it was stronger than anything that had come before. As the night wore on and the fire crackled in the hearth, Jack and Claire sat in the quiet, content in the knowledge that, no matter what came next, they had each other. The future was still uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, Jack felt at peace. He didn't know what the days ahead would bring, but he knew that with Claire by his side, he could face anything. The road ahead would still have its challenges, but Jack was no longer afraid of them. He had learned that love wasn't just about the perfect moments. It was about showing up, every day, for each other. And in that moment, Jack knew that whatever came their way, they would face it together. Winter had settled in fully now, the landscape covered in a thick blanket of snow that seemed to stretch endlessly. Jack and Claire had grown accustomed to the quiet beauty of the season, each day marked by the same steady rhythm that had come to define their life together. The fire crackled in the hearth, filling the house with warmth, while outside, the world was still, save for the occasional gust of wind that swept through the trees. Jack found himself more at peace than he had ever been. The days weren't without their challenges. Farming in winter was always a struggle, and there were times when the cold felt like it would never end. But even in those moments, when the wind howled and the frost crept into every corner of the house, Jack felt a sense of contentment that he had long since abandoned. Claire was by his side, working as hard as he was, and the bond between them had grown stronger with each passing day. It wasn't perfect, but it was real, and that was enough. One evening, as they sat together after dinner, Jack looked over at Claire, her face illuminated by the soft glow of the fire. She was staring into the flames, her expression distant, as though lost in thought. He could sense the weight of her past in those moments of quiet reflection, but he had learned to give her space, knowing that, in time, she would share whatever was on her mind. He didn't need her to be anything other than who she was now, strong, determined, and willing to face the future, no matter how uncertain it might be. "What are you thinking about?" Jack asked softly, his voice breaking the silence. Claire turned to him, her eyes meeting his, and for a moment, he saw a flicker of vulnerability there, quickly hidden behind her usual calm demeanor. "Just everything," she said, her voice quiet. "The past, the present, what comes next?" Jack nodded, understanding all too well the uncertainty that lingered. The future was always a mystery, and despite their progress, they couldn't know what would come next. But there was something in Claire's voice that made him believe, more than ever, that they were ready to face it. "We'll figure it out," he said, his voice steady. "We always do." Claire smiled, a soft, grateful smile that warmed Jack's heart. "I know," she replied, her voice full of certainty. "We're not perfect, but we're together. And that's enough for me." Jack took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the past months lift just a little more. He had been so afraid of the future, afraid of being hurt again, but Claire had proven to him, day after day, that love wasn't about perfection. It was about showing up, about being there for each other, no matter the obstacles. "I'm glad you're here," Jack said, his words simple but filled with more meaning than he could express. Claire reached over and took his hand, her touch gentle but firm. "I'm glad you're here too," she whispered. As they sat together in the quiet of the evening, the world outside as still as the fire in the hearth, Jack felt a peace settle over him. The road ahead was still uncertain, but as long as they had each other, he knew they would face it together. And that, more than anything, was enough. Spring was just around the corner, and with it came a sense of renewal. The snow had begun to melt, revealing the first signs of life in the earth, small buds peeking through the soil, the distant sound of birds returning. Jack and Claire had spent the winter settling into their routine, each day bringing them closer, and though the quiet had once felt isolating, now it felt like peace. The mornings had become their time to work side by side, the afternoons spent caring for the animals, and the evenings, together, by the fire, in the warmth they had both worked so hard to create. Jack had found comfort in the rhythm of their life, the steady beat of their existence. And as the days grew longer and the air warmer, he could feel a shift within himself. The past, though still a part of him, no longer felt like a weight he had to carry. One morning, as Jack stepped outside to tend to the horses, he noticed the sky was clearer than usual, the sun bright and full of promise. The air was fresh, crisp with the hint of spring. As he worked, Claire came outside, carrying a basket of fresh eggs she had just gathered. She smiled at him from across the yard, and for a moment, everything felt right. "Morning," she called, her voice carrying on the wind. Jack turned, returning her smile with a nod. "Morning," he said. Claire walked over, setting the basket down on the porch as she joined him. They worked together in the quiet, their movements synchronized, as if they had always known how to do this, how to share their lives. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, Jack found himself glancing at Claire more often. She had become someone he no longer just lived with. She had become someone he truly shared his life with. "We've come a long way, haven't we?" Claire asked, breaking the comfortable silence between them. Jack paused, looking at her for a moment before answering. "Yeah, we have," he said, his voice soft. "And we're still here. That's what matters." Claire smiled, her eyes filled with a quiet understanding. "It is," she agreed. They spent the rest of the day working together, the hours slipping by unnoticed. Jack found himself lost in the simplicity of it all, the way Claire moved through their life, the way they had built something from nothing. By the time evening came, They were both tired but satisfied, the work of the day behind them. As they sat on the porch, the sun setting in the distance, Jack took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the day and the years slowly lifting from him. The world had changed, and so had they, but there was something constant now, something solid. Jack and Claire were no longer just two people trying to make it work. They were partners, in every sense of the word. The future, once so uncertain, now felt like something they could face together. And for the first time, Jack believed that the life they had built, through all the trials and the struggles, was strong enough to last. They sat in the quiet of the evening, their hands touching lightly, the space between them filled with all the things they no longer needed to say. The past would always be a part of them, but it didn't have to define them. They had found their way back to each other, and that was enough. As the stars began to appear in the sky, Jack looked over at Claire, his heart full, and for the first time in a long time, he felt a sense of peace. He wasn't sure what the future held, but with Claire by his side, he knew they could face it together. Spring had fully taken hold, the once frozen earth now thawing beneath their feet. Jack and Claire found themselves walking through the season of renewal, both in the world around them and in their own hearts. The farm was flourishing, the fruits of their labor now clearly visible, but it wasn't just the land that had blossomed. Their relationship had, too. The quiet moments they had shared through the winter now felt like the foundation of something much more solid. Every day, Jack found himself more grateful for the calm that had settled between them. The years of uncertainty, of questioning what would come next, had melted away like the snow under the warm spring sun. It was no longer about surviving the past. It was about building a future. One morning, as the sun rose high above the horizon, Jack found himself walking to the barn, the air fresh and filled with the scent of new growth. He had always loved the mornings, but now, they felt different. They were filled with purpose. As he walked past the fields, he saw Claire working in the distance, her back bent as she tended to the crops. She was stronger now, more sure of herself than she had been when she first returned. Jack had always admired her, but now, watching her work, he felt a deep sense of pride. She had proven herself, not just to him, but to herself. She was no longer the woman haunted by the past. She was someone who had found her way back to the present, to the life they had built together. Jack walked over to her, his steps quiet on the soft earth. She looked up as he approached, her face lighting up with a smile that made his heart skip a beat. "Morning," she said, her voice warm and steady. Jack smiled back, his eyes meeting hers. "Morning," he replied. They didn't need to say much more. The simplicity of their connection was enough. They worked together, side by side, in the warm morning light. The farm was their shared effort, their shared life, and it felt like the most natural thing in the world. As the day wore on, Jack felt a sense of contentment settle over him. There had been times, not long ago, when he thought he would never feel this way again, when the thought of letting go of the past seemed impossible. But now, with Claire beside him, it didn't seem so hard. It didn't seem like something that would break them. It felt like something that could make them stronger. Later that evening, as they sat on the porch together, the setting sun casting its golden light across the land, Jack took Claire's hand in his fingers wrapping around hers. "We've come a long way," he said softly, his voice filled with both awe and gratitude. Claire squeezed his hand, her gaze focused on the horizon. "We have," she agreed, her voice steady. "But we've still got a long way to go." Jack nodded, his heart swelling with a mixture of pride and anticipation. They didn't have all the answers. They didn't know what the future would bring, but they had each other. And in that moment, Jack knew that was more than enough. Whatever the road ahead held, they would face it together, side by side, just as they always had. And as the sun dipped below the horizon, Jack felt a quiet certainty settle in his chest. The past had shaped them, but it didn't define them. They were free now to build the future they wanted, together.